All right, we've been listening here, our partners at the BBC, as they speak with Mark Regev, a senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in the wake of what appears to be a stark escalation in violence between Israel and Palestinians in Gaza. And a hospital has been struck in Gaza City, and early reports are that hundreds of people have been killed. The Associated Press suggests that if, and that's an important word to use here, this was done by the Israeli Defense Forces, it would be the deadliest strike since 2008. But what we just heard from Mark Regev was that, according to him, and he says he's getting his information from the highest authority in Israel, it does not appear to be a strike caused by the Israel Defense Forces. He claims that it was in fact a rocket fired by the Hamas militant group in Gaza that fell short. CBS News contributor Robert Berger joins us now from Jerusalem with more on this. Robert, no matter who is behind it, there is an incredible amount of loss that just took place in Gaza. Update us on what you know took place.
Well, of course, Of course, there's two narratives here. According to the Palestinians, an Israeli airstrike hit this hospital where not only were there patients, but also hundreds, if not thousands, of people taking refuge from the war. And we're seeing images of carnage. Now, on the Israeli side, the army just came out with a statement saying that they did not target this hospital, that that Israel doesn't deliberately target civilians, and actually they're saying that the Islamic Jihad group fired the rocket. Now, I'm not sure if they're saying they fired the rocket deliberately or if it was a rocket that went astray.
And just to give our viewers an update, Robert, in this conflict, which flared up in the past 10 days, at this stage, there are at least 1,400 dead there in Israel as a result of this war, at least 3,000 dead in Gaza, 30 Americans killed in this conflict, and at this stage, at least 200 hostages captured by Hamas, as Israel says it's prepared to launch an all-out ground offensive, and as U.S. President Joe Biden prepares to head to the region and find some type of solution. Speak to us more about the conditions in this part of the world and on the ground, also in the West Bank, where a short time ago our partners at the BBC showed some unrest there that seemed to be in response to the attack on the hospital in Gaza City.
Right. Well, there are hundreds of people out on the streets in Ramallah. I saw that the Palestinian police were trying to disperse them and keep order, but this is creating agitation in the West Bank, in Jordan, and it's going to increase demonstrations that we've already been seeing across the Arab world. Certainly, no matter what Israel says, we have to see if they can provide proof that they didn't bomb this building, this hospital. But even if they do, I think in the minds of the people in the Arab world, this was an Israeli attack on innocent people, and a lot of people probably think it was even a deliberate attack.
I want to remind our viewers that what we're seeing now is a square there in Ramallah, which is in the West Bank. This is separate and apart from Gaza and Gaza City, where just a short time ago we saw what appeared to be hundreds of people in some form of protest. And there was a crackdown by the local security forces, which are not Israeli, but Palestinian security forces. We can see now an armored vehicle coming through to a square that appears to have been cleared away. Robert, something you're speaking to is, as people emotionally react to what's happening in this war, there is the potential and possibility for misinformation and inaccuracy. How much does that complicate this violent puzzle that the world is trying to fix?
It really does. I mean, of course, already before this, there was a lot of fake news around. but you know, the high casualty toll is really, in this case, with the hospital, in the minds of Arabs here in the region, it's going to speak for itself. The casualty figures aren't clear. We're hearing at least 200, up to 500 people killed. So in the minds of Arabs here in the region, this is an Israeli atrocity, and it's going to stir up the streets, which have already been agitated by this war. It's going to stir up the streets, which complicates things for moderate Arab leaders. As I said, there's been demonstrations in Jordan, which has a peace agreement with Israel. You saw there are some pictures of Ramallah, where apparently the Palestinian police have regained control. But, this complicates things for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who is the head of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, who, by the way, has now canceled his meeting with President Biden that was due to take place tomorrow in Jordan, and he's coming back to Ramallah in the West Bank.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Robert, because it really speaks to the deterioration of the condition here in this part of the world in just the past 3 hours. We have this attack on a hospital with hundreds of people reported killed. You have the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas leaving Jordan, where King Abdullah is set to meet with President Biden and others to try and find a diplomatic solution. He's leaving that meeting to head back to the West Bank, where we've just seen the aftermath of those who are upset and unrest there in response to the strike on the hospital. And we just heard Mark Regev, a former spokesperson for the Israeli government and a current senior advisor, say the IDF does not target hospitals. And it is, in fact, blame that lies at the feet of Hamas and a rocket that fell short. How much worse did things just get today?
A lot worse. And, this is really, the Israelis keep saying that this is just the beginning. I mean, we haven't even seen the expected ground offensive yet, which is likely to be very bloody. Of course, it also complicates things for President Biden, who is coming here tomorrow. Makes things a lot more complicated because in the first place, he had a dual message. We're fully behind Israel, but that the Israelis, one, they need to be careful and prevent civilian casualties. And two, they need to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. So his visit here tomorrow has become a lot more complicated. And of course, the Arab leaders, the moderates that are meeting with President Biden tomorrow in Amman, Jordan, like the president of Egypt and the king of Jordan, they have streets to think about. In other words, the Arab street, the sentiment on the street makes it a lot more difficult for those leaders to back U.S. support for Israel in this conflict.
And meanwhile, it seems, at least from this distance, that everybody in the region is being traumatized. People in Israel are constantly hearing these air raid sirens. Every time we cross to one of our reporters, it seems as though they're minutes before or after sirens have gone off. If you're Palestinian in Gaza and you're trying to flee south, that's if you're able, if you're lucky, you'll be stuck at the Rafah border crossing with Egypt because the country is careful not to open the border effectively. If there are refugees, Egypt will then need to deal with them. Jordan will then need to deal with them. How complicated is the situation in southern Gaza, where some have fled to in an effort to avoid being near airstrikes?
Well, you have a humanitarian crisis that is growing there because Israel basically has Gaza since this terrible attack that began the war took place about 10 days ago. Gaza has been under siege. There's no electricity. Fuel is not being allowed in. Food and water are not being allowed in. So the reason is that Israel is trying to put pressure on Hamas to release 199 prisoners that were taken hostage during the Hamas attack a week ago Saturday. So the situation there is dire, and that's been the main mission of Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's been here, and of course, President Biden coming tomorrow, the humanitarian situation in Gaza. It's a big worry for the United States.
Robert Berger, stand by for us as we'll continue to lean on your expertise as we cover this breaking development. At this point, we want to bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Weijia Jiang. Weijia, two major developments we're discovering here. This reported attack on a hospital in Gaza City, killing hundreds, and reports that Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is now canceling his meeting with President Biden and other leaders, which is supposed to take place tomorrow. What more is the White House saying on these topics?
Well, Errol, so far the White House is not saying anything in any sort of public statement because, as you know, there right now is a blame game going on. And even though Palestine has blamed the Israeli military, the officials from Israel say that this was not us, that this had nothing to do with us. Instead, was a failed rocket launch by Islamic jihadists. And so I believe that the White House is going to abstain for now, although it will have to say something, Errol, especially given that the death toll of civilians continues to rise. And you're right that the Palestinian news agency is reporting that the president there, Abbas, has canceled his trip that he was supposed to have with President Biden in Jordan along with other Arab leaders because he wanted to get back to the homeland in the wake of this tragedy that they are now dealing with. And so it's all related. And Errol, I should point out that this has a much bigger impact as well, because even before today's attack on the hospital, we know that the president of Egypt was calling for Israel to stop bombing, that the crown prince of Saudi Arabia was saying the same thing. So this is the backdrop that President Biden faces as he goes to the region and essentially asks for help from these leaders to try to get humanitarian corridors opened up, to try to negotiate deals to release hostages with partners that do have an impact on Hamas. And so this certainly complicates his trip even more. And we do expect the president still to leave at some point this evening for Tel Aviv.
And talk to us more about that, Weijia, because with Secretary of State Blinken in the region on continual visits to the key players here, what is the purpose of sending of President Biden wanting to go? And now that there's been this escalation and complication in what's taking place, do we expect the trip to continue as planned?
For now, it is moving on as planned, Errol. And that is because the White House and the National Security Council says the president believes this is the right time to go, given the circumstances, given the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding, given the severity of the situation with hostages as each passing day goes by. We know that the president has said it is his greatest priority to help rescue those hostages, particularly Americans who are being held by Hamas. And so that is why they say this is the right time, and whatever Israel plans to do in terms of its military operation is separate. But of course, as you can imagine, planning any presidential trip to a war zone is among the most sensitive and delicate decisions and executions that an administration can do. And so, you know, when things are changing in terms of the climate there in real time, those, of course, will be taken into consideration.
Weijia Jiang at the White House for us. We appreciate that, Weijia. We'll cross back to you when there's more to report from where you are. For viewers just joining us, this is CBS News' continuing coverage of the breaking news out of Israel and Gaza as the conflict there appears to have escalated. There has been a missile strike on a hospital in Gaza City. Early reports are that at least 500 people have been killed, making it one of the deadliest attacks in this part of the world in a long time. CBS News contributor Robert Berger is also following these developments as they come in. And what I want to ask you, Robert, is about what Benjamin Netanyahu can or should be doing at this stage. The IDF is blaming Islamic Jihad now for this strike on a hospital, a second militant group in Gaza. But Benjamin Netanyahu himself has been facing criticism locally for failing to prevent the initial attack from Hamas. Talk to us about what Benjamin Netanyahu might be doing right now and thinking today.
Well, domestically, Netanyahu is in big trouble. And I mean, as far as this hospital attack, this isn't going to stop his determination to carry out Israel's goal, which is to dismantle or destroy Hamas. And especially now, if the military is blaming Islamic Jihad for this this bombing or this rocket that hit, alleged rocket that hit the hospital. But Netanyahu's in big trouble domestically. I mean, this happened on his watch, the worst terrorist attack in Israel's history. We have 1,400 people killed in that assault. So, and Netanyahu, you know, while all of this was, the background to all of this is that Netanyahu's focus has been on the judicial reform to try and limit the powers of the Supreme Court. And there's been huge demonstrations in Israel. And despite warnings from the military and the defense minister that this was emboldening Israel's enemies, Netanyahu is largely seen as having ignored that. So he still hasn't taken responsibility for this, but he wasn't popular in the first place. And this is going to, a lot of people think that when this war is over, he should resign.
How does the current Israeli leadership explain the intelligence lapse that allowed Hamas to cross into its territory, kill people and take hostages?
Basically, they're saying, well, we have a war to fight and we'll answer these questions later. But it's being, analysts are basically saying that Israel had a mistaken concept about Hamas, namely that Hamas could be contained. And so they allowed the Hamas to train and to, you know, to arm itself right under its nose with the feeling that they had an eye on Hamas and there might be occasional rocket flare-ups that would last a week or so, but they felt that the Hamas was contained and wanted to see the benefit of the Palestinian people. And therefore, basically the intelligence community fell asleep. And even though they had some idea that something was up, they thought maybe it would be another rocket barrage as opposed to the massive terrorist infiltration that we saw.
Robert Berger joining us from Jerusalem. Thank you for that. For viewers just joining us, I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York City, continuing our breaking coverage of developments out of the Middle East as it relates to Israel's war with Hamas. Unfortunately, we can report that early reports are at least 500 people have been killed in a missile strike on a hospital in Gaza City. The Israel Defense Forces are blaming Islamic Jihad, saying that a rocket fell short, while early reports from the area are blaming the IDF. CBS News foreign correspondent Imtiaz Tyab joins us now from Jerusalem with more on this, Imtiaz, and the other breaking development that Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is canceling his visit with President Biden, who's supposed to be there by tomorrow. Abbas heading back to the West Bank and Ramallah, where there have been video of unrest there as well. What can you tell us from your point of view?
Hey, Errol, you're absolutely right. There are protests ongoing right now in the occupied West Bank, specifically in the cities of Ramallah and Hebron. These are the two largest cities in the occupied West Bank. And the fact that there's even protests at all is pretty extraordinary, given the fact that since Hamas's brutal assault across southern Israel, Hamas, or rather the West Bank, has essentially been on lockdown. It is next to impossible to travel around the occupied West Bank. We've been trying to get in all day, and it's been incredibly different. In fact, we were just trying to cross a checkpoint into the West Bank, and we were told if we do cross in, we won't be able to get out. But regardless, it really just underscores the horrors that we're seeing coming outside of Gaza City at the Al Ahli Arab Hospital. This is a major hospital inside of Gaza City. It is a specialist hospital. It is a cancer hospital. I've been to this hospital before. It is funded by the Anglican Church out of Great Britain. It has reasonably good health care, excellent doctors, and again, As I was saying, it's a specialist hospital. People go there for cancer treatment. And for this attack to be so deadly, it really just takes your breath away. And we have to acknowledge that this isn't the first time this hospital has been hit. It was also hit on the 14th of October, in which around 5 or 6 healthcare workers were injured, and part of the facility was damaged. But given the severity of what's happening inside Gaza, with so many casualties, so many wounded, the hospital has kept going. Now, if this strike was carried out by Israel, and when you consider how essentially vast Israel's firepower is to be able to I guess create, or rather, cause such a huge and devastating attack on a fairly large hospital complex, this would be the most singular, largest strike in the last, or since 2008, over the last 5 wars that Hamas has fought with Israel. The absolute largest. But when we consider the horrors we've been seeing over the past 10 days, in which now well over 3,000 Palestinians have been killed, it really just speaks to the horrors that are unfolding across Gaza City tonight. Errol.
And Imtiaz, I want to lean into your experience there, having said that you've been to this hospital, you've been to this part of the world. At this point, with 2 completely different narratives about who's at fault, and with all the complications that come with the blockade and security information, how likely is it that we will get a clear answer as to who caused the missile strike to take place?
Yeah, no, it is a very good question. Of course, Israel immediately saying that this hospital wasn't their target, blaming Islamic Jihad, which is one of the Palestinian factions inside of Gaza, saying one of their rockets misfired or accidentally targeted this place. Of course, Hamas and Islamic Jihad saying this is very clearly an Israeli strike. In fact, we've had countries, including Turkey, Qatar, and other nations condemning Israel for this strike. But again, this is the fog of war, and we may never know who actually caused this strike if both sides continue to deny it. And the fact is we'll never likely see any kind of forensic investigation in the future as well by an independent source. And so I suppose at this point, whether it is Israel or whether it was an errant rocket, we are talking about 500 dead Palestinians at a time when Israel is bombarding the Gaza Strip in a way that we have never seen before. As I was saying, there's been now 5 wars between between Hamas and Israel. 5 wars since 2008, and we're already at the deadliest here this time around, only 10 days in. In 2014, which was a 6-week war, a war that lasted over 50 days, and I was there for most of that conflict. Only around around 2,000 Palestinians were killed, and now we're looking at well over 3,000 in the last 10 days. Israel's fury at Hamas, of course, after that brutal attack on southern Israel in which 1,300 Israelis were killed, nearly 10,000 people were wounded, an assault which really made Israel question its own strength as a nation. This is a country that is extremely proud of its very strong military, that's extremely proud of its intelligence abilities, and both of those failed spectacularly. And so we've had this horrific war in Gaza. We're poised to see an Israeli ground invasion go inside the Gaza Strip. Their goal is to, quote, destroy Hamas. And now we have what's happened at this hospital. But again, to answer your question, whether we'll know the truth or not, I really don't know. But the bottom line is this: over 500 people have been killed in what is the deadliest strike inside Gaza in its history. Errol.
Imtiaz Tyab reporting for us live there from Jerusalem. And just to reset where we stand at this moment, at this stage in the conflict and the war between Israel and Hamas, at least 1,400 people have died in Israel, at least 3,000 people in Gaza. And that was before the strike at a hospital, which has reportedly killed at least 500 people. At least 200 people in Israel have been captured by Hamas and are taken hostage. And at this stage, at least 30 Americans have been killed. Weijia Jiang, senior White House correspondent, joins us now ahead of what was meant to be President Biden's trip to this region. Weijia, what can President Biden hope to achieve, considering everything I've just laid out?
Well, this was always going to be a difficult trip, Errol, for President Biden. Not so much the part meeting with Israeli leaders, which of course has a massive impact politically and as the entire world watches, but as he meets with Arab leaders, because he has said repeatedly that his top priority is to focus on hostages, to focus on the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding. And of course, the administration stressing that it wants the loss of civilian lives to be controlled as much as possible. And then you have this hospital bombing, which I should say, Errol, that as of right now, the White House has not said anything publicly about this bombing, because there are conflicting reports, as you and Imtiaz just laid out, about who is responsible. And who is responsible will have ripple effects, Errol, and implications. And we might not ever get an answer that is a consensus, but certainly both sides are already making their arguments, and we're seeing how this is complicating the president's efforts, because the Palestinian news agency is reporting that the president of the Palestine Authority has decided to cut his trip to Jordan short, and he will no longer be attending the summit that President Biden plans to have with various Arab leaders. So there is pressure on him already, Errol, to try to cool tensions. There are calls from these Arab leaders to try to get Israel to stop its siege. And so the president is sort of stuck in the middle, while at the same time declaring unwavering, rock-solid support for Israel. So it was never going to be easy, and what is unfolding as we speak is adding to the complications, and we are expecting at any moment to hear from senior administration officials about how this, if at all, reshapes the president's visit. Not physically, because at this point we still anticipate he is going to be leaving sometime this evening, but certainly with the added impact that this will have on his meetings and on his goals there, Errol.
That's right. A jarring escalation in violence in what has already been a very traumatic week and 10 days for so many. My thanks to Weijia Jiang, Imtiaz Tyab and Robert Berger. We will bring updates to our viewers as soon as we get more information out of the Middle East.